The first time Colonel Grant laughed at her, it was loud enough to echo across the concrete parade ground. It wasn't a cruel laugh, not at first, more the careless kind that came easily to men who had never been challenged. "You're late," he said, eyes flicking to the plain gray uniform she wore, unadorned except for a small, unfamiliar insignia on her collar. "And you're standing in my briefing like you belong here." She met his gaze without flinching. "I do belong here," she said calmly. That only made him laugh harder. Her name was Elena Ward. Or at least, that's what the paperwork said. She had arrived at Forward Operations Command at dawn, carrying a single duffel bag and a sealed envelope marked with a red stripe. No medals on her chest. No entourage. No announcement. Just a quiet presence that didn't ask permission to exist. Colonel Grant had been running this base for 3 years. He had earned his authority through decades of service, a reputation for discipline, and a belief, shared by many, that rank was something you could see, hear, and feel. And when he looked at Elena, he saw none of it. For days, he mocked her. He corrected her posture in front of junior officers. He questioned her experience during briefings. He assigned her to observe instead of lead, to take notes instead of speak. Once, when she suggested an alternative evacuation route for a convoy operating in hostile terrain, he waved her off with a smirk. "I'll take advice from people who've actually been outside an office," he said, glancing around the room for laughs. A few people chuckled. Most stayed silent. Elena said nothing. She took notes. She listened. She watched. At night, alone in her temporary quarters, she studied satellite feeds and casualty reports. She memorized names. She traced patterns others had missed. She wrote letters she never sent and read messages she never replied to. Her face, when she finally slept, carried the weight of years no one here knew about, years of decisions that had sent people home and years that had sent them nowhere at all. By the 4th day, word had spread. The woman Colonel doesn't like. The analyst who thinks she knows better. The one with the strange insignia. Some speculated she was intelligence. Others thought she was a political observer. No one guessed the truth. On the 5th day, everything went wrong. A battalion operating north of the base walked straight into a coordinated ambush. Communications were jammed. Drones went dark. Initial reports were fragmented, panicked. 47 soldiers pinned down. Air support delayed by weather. Extraction routes compromised. The command room erupted into chaos. Colonel Grant barked orders, his voice sharp, clipped. Units were rerouted. Requests were made and denied. Time slipped away in seconds that felt like minutes. Elena stood at the edge of the room, eyes fixed on the shifting map. She saw it before anyone else, the subtle movement pattern, the false retreat, the kill zone forming like a closing fist. "They're hurting us," she said. Grant ignored her. "They're pulling the battalion toward the ravine," she continued, louder now. "If they cross that line, they won't make it out." Grant spun around, irritation flashing across his face. "I did not ask for commentary," he snapped. "This is an active operation." "It's an active trap," she replied, her voice steady but urgent. "And you're walking them into it." The room went quiet. Grant stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "Enough. If you can't follow protocol, you can leave." Elena didn't leave. Instead, she stepped forward and placed a flash drive on the table. "These are projections based on terrain analytics and enemy behavior patterns from the last 6 months, she said. "If you reroute Alpha and delay Bravo by 12 minutes, you can break the encirclement." Grant didn't touch the drive. A young captain did. He glanced at the data, then looked up, eyes wide. "Sir, she might be right." Grant hesitated. Pride warred with instinct. Finally, he gave a sharp nod. "Fine. 12 minutes. The reroute went through. 10 minutes later, enemy fire erupted exactly where Elena had predicted. The battalion escaped the kill zone with minimal casualties. No one cheered. No one spoke. Grant didn't thank her, but he didn't mock her again that day. The next morning, the sealed envelope Elena had carried since her arrival was delivered to the base command office. It bore a single instruction: open at 0800. Grant broke the seal with practiced indifference. By 0802, his hands were shaking. The document inside was brief, official, unmistakable. Elena Ward was not an analyst. She was not an observer. She was not a junior officer out of her depth. She was Admiral Elena Ward. Strategic command, highest operational authority in the region. The room seemed to shrink around him. At 0815, the base was called to assembly. Elena stood on the platform, her uniform now fully adorned. Metals caught the morning light. The unfamiliar insignia made sense now. Colonel Grant stood at attention in the front row, face pale, eyes fixed straight ahead. Elena addressed them without triumph, without anger. "I was sent here to evaluate readiness, leadership, and adaptability," she said. "Not to test obedience, but judgment." Her gaze swept the crowd, then settled briefly on Grant. "Rank is not always loud," she continued. "And authority is not proven by how many voices you silence, but by how many you're willing to hear." She spoke of the ambush, of the soldiers who made it home, of the ones who didn't in past operations that might have gone differently if someone had been listened to. Her voice never wavered, but emotion threaded through every word. When she finished, the silence was heavy. Later that day, Colonel Grant requested a private meeting. He stood when she entered, posture rigid. "Admiral," he said, voice tight, "I owe you an apology." She gestured for him to sit. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about the people who depend on you." He swallowed. "I misjudged you. I let assumptions guide my actions." She nodded. "We all do. The question is whether we correct them in time." Grant looked down at his hands. "Am I being relieved?" "Not today," she replied. "But things will change." They did. Under Elena's guidance, the base transformed. Briefings became discussions. Junior officers spoke without fear. Data mattered more than ego. Lives, slowly, were lost less often. When Elena finally departed, there was no fanfare. Just a quiet salute from a colonel who had learned the cost of underestimating someone. Weeks later, Grant stood alone on the parade ground, watching a new group of officers assemble. Among them was a young lieutenant, uncertain, quiet, standing a little apart. Grant stepped forward. "What do you think?" he asked her. She looked startled. "Sir, the route," he said. "Would you change it?" She hesitated, then spoke. Grant listened, and somewhere far away, an admiral read a report and allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Because leadership, she knew, wasn't about being recognized. It was about making sure others were finally seen.